4 galvanized nails had been driven through the red notice and deep into the cedar door of my lake cabin. Fresh splinters curled around each puncture. Beneath the sharp morning scent of pine and damp soil, I could still smell the cedar oil I had rubbed into that door the previous fall. The finish had taken me an entire weekend. Now a laminated sheet hung crooked across it, trembling whenever the wind moved through the trees. The Pinewater Shores Homeowners Association was giving me 72 hours to leave. According to the notice, the cabin stood on community-owned land. The board claimed I had no legal right to occupy the building, use the gravel driveway, keep my fishing boat at the dock, or prevent the HOA from entering the property. If I remained after the deadline, they intended to change the locks, remove my truck, board the windows, and begin legal proceedings to recover what they called association property. Their preparations had already begun. At the bottom of the driveway, 2 private security guards leaned against a dark SUV. 20 feet behind them sat a contractor's truck loaded with plywood, chains, orange survey stakes, and several packages of new locks. No one brings plywood to deliver a warning. They had come expecting possession. For a few seconds, the only sounds were water touching the dock and a woodpecker hammering somewhere beyond the eastern ridge. Then one of the guards raised a phone and pointed it toward me, waiting to record whatever reaction followed. He did not get one. Without a word of argument or a single angry movement toward the notice, I denied them the scene they had come to capture. Photographs came first: the nails, the damaged wood, the wording of the notice, the vehicles, the plates, the equipment in the truck, and the time displayed on my watch. Next came the cameras. A small green light appeared above the porch when the system began uploading footage to cloud storage. The driveway camera caught both guards. Another covered the eastern boundary. A third looked across the front door and the stone steps. Only after everything was recording did I step inside. The deadbolt slid into place with a heavy metallic click. Through the narrow window beside the door, the guards remained visible at the bottom of the hill. Neither moved. They were not there to protect anyone. Their job was to make the threat feel immediate. At 58, after most of a career spent as a civil engineer, I had learned that intimidation worked best against people who reacted before they documented. Raised voices disappeared, memory changed. Paper trails stayed where they were placed. A hard knock struck the door less than 5 minutes later. Through the camera feed, Cynthia Vale appeared on the porch. The heels of her shoes had announced her before the lens caught her face, each step cracking against the loose driveway gravel and breaking the stillness of the morning. Oversized sunglasses covered half her features. Under one arm rested a thick black folder, its corners aligned as neatly as the files of someone arriving to inventory property already won. Her gaze moved across the porch, the windows, the dock, and the roofline. She did not look like a neighbor visiting another homeowner. She looked like a buyer inspecting a building after closing. Rather than open the door, I watched from my desk as she removed a document from the folder and held it up to the camera. A second notice followed, then a demand for keys. When no response came, the folder was placed against the door. Cynthia stayed on the porch for several more seconds, motionless except for one finger tapping against her wrist. Irritation slowly replaced the certainty in her posture. Then she turned and walked back down the driveway, leaving the guards behind. Only after her SUV disappeared through the trees did I retrieve the folder. Inside were violation notices, invoices, legal warnings, maps, photographs, and a payment demand totaling $18,400. The HOA claimed the amount represented unpaid assessments, architectural penalties, administrative charges, enforcement costs, and attorney fees. At the bottom lay the document they expected to frighten me most. It described my continued presence in the cabin as unlawful occupation. Another page instructed me to surrender all keys while the association corrected an alleged defect in the property records. The folder had been prepared to look final. Every page carried a logo. Every claim appeared beneath a heading. Every threat had a deadline. None of that made it true. Beneath my desk sat a fireproof safe. When the lock released, the hinges opened with a low scrape, revealing a row of document sleeves, survey plats, closing papers, tax records, and one original deed. The first time I had held that deed, Harold Bennett had been sitting across from me at a scarred oak table in the same cabin. Nearly 10 years had passed since that afternoon. Harold was already in his late 70s then. His hands shook slightly whenever he lifted a coffee cup, but his memory remained precise. He knew where his father had placed every boundary marker, which storms had damaged the dock, and which white oak near the water had survived the construction of the lake. The Bennett family had owned the property since the 1960s, long before Pinewater Shores existed. Harold's father built the cabin with local stone, pine beams, and cedar siding. No development surrounded it in those days. The road was narrower, the shoreline darker, and the nearest house stood almost a mile away. By the time Harold decided to sell, his wife had died and his children had settled in other states. Maintaining the roof, porch, dock, and wooded acreage had become more than he wanted to manage. I was searching for a quiet place after years of working around concrete plants, highway projects, excavation sites, and urban traffic. The cabin needed repairs. Its floors sloped slightly. The porch rail had weathered gray. Rainwater leaked around the chimney. None of that discouraged me. Before closing, I reviewed the deed, tax records, survey, easements, and title history. A title company examined the chain of ownership. A real estate attorney confirmed the legal description. The parcel contained just under 2 acres, including the cabin, driveway, dock, shoreline, and a narrow wooded strip along its eastern edge. Pinewater Shores had been built around the Bennett land decades later. When the developer formed the HOA in 1998, the Bennett parcel was specifically excluded. The only right granted to the association was a narrow utility easement for maintaining an underground water line near the property boundary. That easement did not transfer ownership. It did not create a road. It did not grant lake access. For years, everyone understood the arrangement. Although I was not an HOA member, I voluntarily contributed to maintenance of the private road leading through the neighborhood. The agreement was limited and clear. My payment covered road upkeep. It did not place my land under the board's control. The previous HOA president never pretended otherwise. Cynthia Vale became president 3 years after I bought the cabin. Within months, Pinewater Shores began receiving polished newsletters about a lakefront improvement plan. Renderings showed a large clubhouse, an expanded marina, guest parking, landscaped walkways, and a paved road leading from the upper neighborhood to the water. Residents were promised higher property values and a more prestigious community. The drawings left out one important fact. The most practical route to the lake crossed my land. Behind the cabin, an old logging trail descended through the eastern side of the parcel. It was narrow, uneven, and nearly hidden beneath pine needles, but the slope was gentle. Compared with the steep terrain owned by the HOA, converting that trail into a road would be cheap. The association first offered to buy a strip of my property. Their offer ignored the value of the shoreline, the loss of privacy, and the effect of regular vehicle traffic passing within 60 feet of my porch. It also treated permanent access as though it were nothing more than unused woodland. I declined in writing. A month later, the first violation arrived. The cabin's exterior color had supposedly never been approved. No paint had touched the siding in 4 years. Another notice accused me of storing a boat improperly. The boat was secured beside my private dock. Then came complaints about a trash container, stacked firewood, porch lights, roof repairs, landscaping, and a mature pine tree labeled a danger to common property. Each envelope included another fine. My responses remained polite and repetitive in only one respect. Every letter requested the exact covenant granting the HOA authority over my parcel. No such covenant ever appeared. Instead, Cynthia mailed me a new map. At first glance, it looked convincing. Parcel lines were drawn in clean black ink. Bearings, distances, references, and a surveyor's seal occupied the margins. The old logging trail had been labeled community access. Years of reading construction drawings made the problems visible almost immediately. One boundary had shifted nearly 80 feet. A strip of my shoreline had been colored as recreational land. The trail no longer appeared as part of my parcel. Precision had been used to disguise invention. After I challenged the map, the board called an emergency meeting. The room was packed. Printed copies of the same survey sat on every chair. Cynthia occupied the center seat behind a long table, with the HOA attorney on one side and the community manager on the other. Rather than address my request for governing documents, the board announced that my deed contained a defective legal description. A later filing, they claimed, had corrected the mistake and placed the cabin within association-controlled land. The $18,400 in fines and legal fees became immediately due. Days later, a formal demand arrived from the HOA's attorney. It threatened a lien, foreclosure, and removal from the property. The letter also instructed me to surrender my keys while the ownership dispute was reviewed. No heated reply followed. From that point forward, every communication had to be made in writing. 2 additional cameras went up along the driveway and eastern boundary. Every survey marker was photographed. Letters, envelopes, emails, invoices, meeting notices, and maps were scanned and stored in separate locations. Then I called Samuel Price. Samuel was a licensed surveyor who had worked in the county for more than 20 years. He arrived before sunrise one Monday with a tripod, locator equipment, flagging tape, and several rolls of old plats. For 2 days, he worked through the woods, brushing leaves away from iron pins and measuring angles between monuments older than the HOA itself. While Samuel was completing his fieldwork, the cameras captured activity before dawn. 2 board members entered the property with a contractor. Their flashlights moved between the trees like pale insects. Orange stakes appeared along the logging trail. Several trunks were marked with paint. One stake went into the ground beside my porch. Another worker measured the stone support columns beneath the cabin. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, they were gone. Every second had been recorded. That afternoon, Martha Reed stopped at the cabin. She had lived in Pinewater Shores since the first homes were built and had attended several planning sessions for the clubhouse project. Her written statement described Cynthia assuring residents that the lake access problem would soon disappear. The board, she had indicated, possessed more money, more legal support, and more endurance than one cabin owner. Samuel finished the survey the following week. Spread across my dining table, his plat lined up with the original property records almost perfectly. The boundary claimed by the HOA did not. Their map had shifted the eastern line. It had also transformed a private trail into a community road without a recorded easement, transfer, or court order. Then Samuel pointed to the certification number printed beneath the surveyor's seal. That number belonged to a commercial project in another county. The seal appeared to have been copied. With the new survey in hand, I went to the county records office. The building smelled faintly of dust, toner, and old paper. Hours passed beneath fluorescent lights as subdivision plats, deeds, amendments, easements, and incorporation records accumulated across the table. The original 1974 plat showed the Bennett parcel exactly where Samuel had placed it. The HOA declaration from 1998 listed every property subject to Pinewater Shores. My parcel was absent. A separate exhibit removed any possible ambiguity. The Bennett land was identified as private property outside the planned community. There it was in recorded ink. The HOA had no authority over the cabin. It could not regulate the siding, fine me for a boat, control the driveway, or claim the shoreline. Yet the association's attorney continued pointing to a corrective deed filed 5 years earlier. That document altered part of the Bennett legal description and transferred the logging trail to an entity connected with the HOA. At the bottom appeared Harold Bennett's signature. The date stopped me. Harold had already been dead for nearly 2 years. A certified death certificate confirmed it. Further examination created more problems. The corrective deed claimed to have been notarized at a law office that had closed months before the alleged signing. The notary's commission number did not match the county's records for that date. What had begun as a false boundary claim now carried the shape of forgery. Back at the cabin, the original deed came out of the safe again. This time I examined every attachment Harold had preserved with it. Behind the closing survey lay a recorded easement agreement signed by the original developer of Pinewater Shores. Its language was exact. The HOA could enter a narrow strip only to inspect or repair an underground water line. It could not widen the trail, remove trees, construct a road, park vehicles, transport equipment, or use the property for recreational lake access. One document dismantled the entire theory behind Cynthia's project. Laura Mitchell, a real estate attorney recommended by the title company, reviewed the evidence across 3 long meetings. By the end of the third, the conference table had vanished beneath surveys, plats, photographs, camera stills, correspondence, and certified county records. Her first action was a preservation notice. The HOA was ordered to retain emails, text messages, meeting notes, contracts, invoices, electronic maps, financial files, and every version of the corrective deed. A second letter demanded withdrawal of the fines, removal of all claims against the property, and an immediate end to trespassing. Cynthia ignored both. 3 days later, while I was buying groceries in town, a security notification appeared on my phone. The live feed showed the contractor's truck beside the porch. 2 workers carried tools toward the front door. A board member stood behind them holding a clipboard. One worker knelt beside the lock and began drilling. The sound came through the camera microphone in short metallic bursts. A call to the sheriff's office went out before I left the parking lot. By the time I reached the cabin, a deputy's vehicle blocked the driveway. The contractor stood near his truck. The board member held several pages of HOA paperwork, but no court order, no writ of possession, and no document authorizing entry. The damaged lock hung loose from the cedar door. My deed, tax record, survey, identification, and Laura's cease and desist letter were already organized in a folder. After reviewing them, the deputy removed the contractor and board representative from the property. His report documented the damaged lock, attempted entry, trespass, and lack of legal authority. By the following morning, Laura had filed for an emergency injunction. The court temporarily prohibited the HOA, its board, employees, contractors, and agents from entering my land, changing locks, cutting utilities, removing possessions, altering the driveway, disturbing survey markers, or beginning construction. That should have ended the pressure. Instead, it opened the records. Discovery forced the HOA to produce internal emails. One message acknowledged that the Bennett parcel had never been formally annexed into Pinewater Shores. Another instructed the property manager to increase fines and create enough pressure to force a sale. A third admitted that the association possessed no road easement across the logging trail. Then Laura found the financial connection. A consulting company registered to Cynthia was scheduled to receive a substantial project management payment once construction of the clubhouse and access road began. That arrangement had never been disclosed to residents. The most damaging file was an electronic draft of the corrective deed. Its metadata showed that the document had circulated through Cynthia's email account before being filed with the county. The deed had not surfaced during an innocent title search. Someone inside the board's orbit had helped create it. By the time the hearing began, the dispute was no longer about paint colors or unpaid assessments. The courtroom held evidence of trespass, attempted unlawful eviction, fraudulent filing, abuse of association authority, and concealed financial interest. Rain streaked the courthouse windows that morning. Wet coats, paper, and old wood gave the room a close, stale smell. Cynthia sat behind the HOA's attorneys in a navy suit, her posture rigid and her hands folded over a leather notebook. The same oversized sunglasses were gone. Without them, the exhaustion around her eyes was visible. At first, the association's attorney spoke with confidence. The newer survey was displayed. The corrective deed followed. He described the case as a misunderstanding caused by an outdated property description and suggested that my ownership extended only to the cabin footprint, not the disputed trail or shoreline. Laura did not respond with accusations. She built the timeline. The 1974 subdivision plat went first. Then came the 1998 HOA declaration, followed by the exhibit excluding the Bennett parcel. Samuel's independent survey was placed beside the HOA map, exposing the shifted line. The copied certification number appeared on an enlarged display. A low murmur moved through the rear benches before the judge restored silence. Next came the original deed. Its paper had yellowed slightly around the edges, but the recording stamps, legal description, and signatures remained clear. Attached to it was the restrictive utility easement that prohibited road construction across my land. The HOA attorney began arguing that the later corrective deed superseded those records. That was when Laura placed Harold Bennett's certified death certificate beside it. The atmosphere in the room changed. Until that moment, the hearing had carried the dry rhythm of maps, dates, and legal descriptions. The death certificate broke that rhythm completely. Harold had died almost 2 years before the date written beside his supposed signature. The HOA attorney stopped turning pages. His hand remained suspended over the document, fingers slightly apart, as though the next page might contain an explanation he already knew was not there. Behind him, Cynthia's folded hands separated. One moved toward the base of her throat. The color drained from her face so quickly that the dark fabric of her suit seemed suddenly harsher against her skin. The judge leaned forward and compared the dates. His attention then moved from the deed to Cynthia. Without raising his voice, he required the HOA to explain how a deceased property owner could have signed a transfer nearly 2 years after his death. No coherent explanation followed. The attorney suggested a clerical error. Laura answered with the closed law office, the invalid notary details, Harold's verified signatures, and the electronic draft recovered from Cynthia's account. Each piece removed another possible excuse. The sheriff's report came next. Then the footage of the contractor drilling into my front door. Still images showed board members placing stakes along the logging trail before any court had recognized their claim. Martha's statement demonstrated prior intent. Finally, Cynthia's emails appeared on the courtroom screen. One acknowledged the lack of annexation. Another discussed increasing penalties until I sold. The financial records connecting her company to the clubhouse project completed the sequence. For several moments after the last document was entered, the room remained silent. The HOA had arrived with a map and a threat. Laura had answered with a chain of evidence extending across decades. When the judge ruled, he did so carefully. The corrective deed was invalid. The HOA map carried no legal authority. The cabin, driveway, dock, shoreline, and logging trail lay outside Pinewater Shore's jurisdiction. Every fine was void. No lien could be imposed. No key could be demanded. No entry onto the land could be justified through HOA rules. The temporary injunction became permanent. The association was ordered to pay my legal fees, survey expenses, repair costs, and damages arising from trespass and attempted unlawful entry. Additional damages followed because the board had continued its conduct after receiving formal notice that its authority was disputed. The questionable deed, notary information, and related electronic records were referred to the county prosecutor. Cynthia remained seated after the ruling. The leather notebook lay closed in front of her. Her fingers rested on the cover, but the certainty that had filled my driveway was gone. Outside the courthouse, rain continued falling across the stone steps. The consequences inside Pinewater Shores came quickly. Residents demanded the board's financial records. Once Cynthia's consulting arrangement became public, a special membership meeting was called. She was removed as president. 2 other board members resigned before the vote. The clubhouse project collapsed when the developer withdrew. Without access across my land, the road required expensive grading, retaining walls, and additional permits. The publicity surrounding the deed made the entire project toxic. Several past enforcement actions were reviewed. Other homeowners discovered penalties unsupported by the governing documents, and some of those fines were refunded. The HOA issued a written apology and withdrew every claim filed against my property. Repairing the cabin took less time than repairing the damage the case had done to the neighborhood. The lock had to be replaced. 4 nail holes remained in the cedar door. A section of gravel near the porch had been scraped by the contractor's truck, and several boundary markers needed resetting. Most of the work I completed myself. Late one afternoon, after smoothing the last patch in the door, I carried the red eviction notice into the cabin. The paper no longer looked official. Its corners had curled. Rainwater had blurred part of the HOA logo. 4 round holes marked the places where the nails had pierced it. I placed the notice inside the fireproof safe. Beside it went a certified copy of the court order confirming that Pinewater Shores had never owned the cabin, the driveway, or the trail. The original deed rested underneath both. Outside, wind moved through the pines and carried the dry whisper of needles across the roof. The old logging trail disappeared between the trees, narrow and undisturbed. No asphalt covered it. No construction lights flashed beyond the ridge. No clubhouse traffic climbed toward my porch. Only the lake moved, darkening beneath the evening sky. The red notice remained locked away beside the judgment that destroyed it. Beyond the window, the trail stayed silent.